The air in the central operations hub of Synapse Tech on that ominous Friday afternoon was not merely tense. It was thick, viscous, clinging to every breath. A suffocating silence, broken only by the low, insistent hum of servers and the frantic clicking of keyboards, pressed down on the dozen or so engineers hunched over glowing monitors. The anemic bluish light from 100 screens cast an eerie pallor on their faces, highlighting furrowed brows and the subtle sheen of cold sweat. The faint, bitter tang of stale coffee mingled with the metallic scent of desperation, a cocktail that promised only exhaustion and impending doom. At the epicenter of this digital maelstrom was David Chen, CEO of Synapse Tech. At 38, David was a prodigy, a self-made titan in the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley, though his company's primary operations were strategically located in the burgeoning tech scene of Hanoi. He'd built Synapse from a 3-person startup in a cramped rented office into a global colossus, a company whose cloud-based data management systems underpinned the very infrastructure of modern finance, healthcare, and logistics. His company's name, Synapse, was carefully chosen to evoke the intricate, interconnected pathways of the brain, symbolizing the seamless, instantaneous flow of information his systems promised. He prided himself on radical innovation, on pushing boundaries, and on creating what he often publicly boasted were impenetrable, self-healing, always-on networks. The phrase was a mantra, a promise, and now a terrifying irony. David's personal journey was a testament to sheer willpower. He'd come from humble beginnings, a childhood spent navigating the complex, often unforgiving streets of a bustling Asian metropolis, far from the ivy-covered halls of prestigious universities. He'd clawed his way to the top, not with inherited wealth or connections, but with raw intellect and relentless drive. This background had instilled in him a fierce independence, but also a deep-seated belief that only the most brilliant, the most rigorously trained, the most qualified minds could truly navigate the labyrinthine complexities of high tech. He cultivated an image of polished success, bespoke suits, a carefully curated social media presence, interviews emphasizing his foresight and unwavering control. Yet beneath the veneer of self-assurance, David carried the immense, crushing weight of responsibility, a silent terror of failure that could shatter not just his company, but the meticulously constructed facade of his own achievements. His opulent penthouse in the city center felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage, a constant reminder of the expectations he had to meet. Beside David, her usually composed demeanor now frayed at the edges, was Maria Lopez, the brilliant 42-year-old head of engineering. Maria was David's right hand, the technical genius who translated his grand visions into robust functional systems. She was a master of intricate code, a problem solver par excellence, revered by her team for her sharp intellect and calm under pressure. But even Maria, with her decades of experience battling digital demons, felt the chill of impending doom. She had been the first to notice the anomalous spikes, the erratic data flows, the subtle tremors that signaled something deeply wrong within their flagship Nexus system, the core platform that managed global financial transactions for a consortium of major international banks. It began as a small, almost undetectable glitch in a secondary server farm in Dublin, then spread with an alarming, cancerous rapidity. Now the Nexus was sputtering, threatening to flatline, a digital heart attack on a global scale. Maria was running on pure adrenaline and stale coffee, her hair disheveled, her glasses slightly askew, but her focus remained laser-sharp, even as the walls of her professional composure began to crack under the strain. The air conditioner, usually a subtle hum, now seemed to whine in protest against the rising heat of overworked servers and overwrought nerves. Outside the reinforced glass walls of the hub, the city lights of Hanoi twinkled, oblivious to the silent crisis unfolding within. It was 6:45 p.m. The critical juncture was just hours away. Adding to the unbearable pressure was the whispers, now growing louder, about Project Chimera. This was Synapse Tech's top-secret, next-generation, AI-driven predictive analytics platform, poised to revolutionize global stock markets. Project Chimera, David's pet project and the culmination of years of R&D, was set for its grand unveiling to a consortium of top-tier investors and the international press first thing Monday morning. Its entire functionality, its very existence, depended precariously on the absolute, unflappable stability of the Nexus system. If Nexus crashed, Chimera would not just fail, it would be rendered utterly meaningless, a multi-billion-dollar investment reduced to lines of inert code. The prospect alone was enough to make David's stomach clench. In stark contrast to the high-stakes drama unfolding in the operations hub, the rest of the building was gradually emptying. Desks grew dark, the clatter of keyboards faded, and the gentle whir of cleaning equipment began to echo through the empty corridors. This was the domain of Old Man Peterson, a janitor who had been with Synapse Tech since its very nascent days, long before the sleek glass tower replaced the humble rented office. He was a figure of quiet routine, his presence so ingrained in the building's fabric that most employees barely registered him beyond a fleeting nod. He moved through the offices like a shadow, sweeping, mopping, emptying bins, always in silence, a man seemingly content with his humble place. His face was a roadmap of quiet endurance, etched with the gentle lines of age and unspoken stories. Few knew he was a widower, that his wife had passed years ago, leaving him to raise their only son. He harbored a profound, almost fierce love for his son, Leo, a skinny, bright-eyed boy with a mop of unruly brown hair and an unsettlingly intense gaze behind thick-rimmed glasses. Old Man Peterson rarely spoke of Leo, never boasted, but every extra hour he worked, every meticulous sweep of his broom was for Leo's future. He harbored a secret dream of seeing his son transcend the generational poverty, to have opportunities he himself never had. He often wondered what Leo, with his strange fascination for how things work and his endless tinkering with discarded electronics, would become. As the clock ticked past 7 p.m., the atmosphere in the operations hub reached a fever pitch. Maria's voice, usually calm, was now strained as she barked orders, her fingers flying across a diagnostic interface. "It's jumping, David. The primary data conduits in Singapore are rejecting packets, and now Hamburg is mirroring the error." The map of the globe on the giant central screen, usually a vibrant tapestry of green connections, was beginning to flicker ominously, red warning lights blooming like malevolent digital flowers. David paced the floor, a restless tiger in a cage. He barked into his phone, demanding updates from remote teams, his voice hoarse with stress. "What's the root cause? We need a root cause. We're losing financial data by the minute in our European sectors." The projected financial losses were already staggering, spiraling upwards with every second of downtime. The thought of the impending Monday morning announcement for Project Chimera sent a jolt of icy fear through him. If Nexus wasn't stable, Chimera was dead on arrival. His legacy, the company's valuation, everything he had built, balanced on a knife edge. This was the quiet before the storm, not just outside, but within the system. The insidious flaw, tiny at first, had burrowed deep into Synapse Tech's most vital artery. The collective genius of their top engineers, brilliant as they were, was failing to grasp the true nature of the problem, bogged down by the sheer complexity and interconnectedness of the system. They were searching for a monstrous, obvious bug, unaware that the problem was a subtle, almost invisible anomaly, a systemic quirk hidden in plain sight. They were looking for a dragon when the problem was a chameleon, subtly changing its patterns, camouflaging itself within the intricate data streams. The air hung heavy with the scent of impending catastrophe. David Chen, for the first time in a long time, felt a profound, chilling sense of helplessness. His carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble, and he didn't know how to stop it. The initial tremor in the Nexus system, what Maria had first logged as an anomalous data spike in the Singapore server farm, quickly escalated from an obscure diagnostic flicker to a full-blown digital hemorrhage. It began subtly, a faint rhythmic stutter in the data stream flowing from their crucial Asian hubs. Then, the European servers, connected through complex, high-speed fiber optic lines, began to mirror the erratic behavior. It was like watching a perfectly synchronized orchestra suddenly lose its rhythm, then its melody, one instrument after another veering wildly off-key. Maria, her face now stark and pale under the bluish monitor glow, slammed her hand on the console. "It's a cascade, David, not a single point of failure. It's propagating." Her voice was tight, thin, stretched to its limit. On the giant global map projected on the main wall, What had been a vibrant network of green, pulsating lines signifying healthy data flow now erupted in a terrifying constellation of angry red warnings. Blinking squares represented overloaded servers, fractured lines denoted broken connections, and entire regions of the digital globe turned a sickly, alarming crimson. Financial transactions for major banks, healthcare records, logistics data for multinational corporations, all the critical information that Synapse Tech was entrusted with was now in jeopardy. David Chen, who had been pacing like a caged tiger moments before, froze. His jaw, usually set in a determined line, now hung slightly agape. The cold dread that had settled in his stomach in Chapter 1 transformed into a burning, nauseating panic. Propagating? What are you talking about, Maria? We have redundancy. We have firewalls. Nexus is self-healing. His voice, usually so controlled, was now a strained, desperate rasp, laced with a raw terror he rarely allowed himself to show. He prided himself on his unflappable composure, his ability to always project an image of absolute control. Now, that facade was crumbling, revealing the profound anxiety simmering beneath. He snatched up his phone, barking orders into it, his usual calm replaced by frantic urgency. "Get everyone in here. All hands on deck. No one leaves until this is resolved." He knew, with a sickening certainty, what this meant. Millions, potentially billions, in financial losses. Reputational damage that would take decades to repair, if ever. The stock market, already volatile, would surely plummet at the first whisper of a Synapse Tech system failure. And Project Chimera, his multi-billion-dollar AI platform, the culmination of his life's work, due to be unveiled to the world's most influential investors on Monday morning, would be stillborn. The image of his meticulously crafted success, his carefully constructed legacy, shattered into a million digital pieces, flashed before his eyes. The gilded cage of his penthouse suddenly felt like a tomb. The crisis deepened with terrifying speed. Error messages, incomprehensible lines of code, cascaded down every screen, a torrent of digital gibberish that even Maria's brilliant mind struggled to decipher. It's like a logic bomb," Maria muttered, pushing her glasses up her nose, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and intellectual fascination. "But it's not external. It's internal. A fundamental structural flaw. We can't isolate it. Every patch we try, every firewall we implement, it just finds another path." Her team, usually efficient and sharp, now looked defeated, their faces pale with exhaustion and the chilling realization of their collective failure. They typed furiously, ran diagnostics, shouted suggestions, but nothing stemmed the tide. The red warnings on the global map expanded, consuming more and more regions, like a digital plague spreading across continents. Just as David's panic threatened to overwhelm him, just as Maria declared, "It's beyond anything we've ever seen, David. We're losing too much data. This could take weeks, maybe months, to untangle from the ground up." An unexpected, almost surreal interruption broke the suffocating tension. The heavy, insulated door to the operations hub, usually sealed with biometric locks, hissed open. In the doorway stood Leo. He was a small figure, barely reaching David's waist, his thin frame encased in a slightly too large hoodie that swallowed his hands. His head was bowed, his unruly brown hair falling over thick-rimmed glasses that perched precariously on his small nose. He clutched a brown paper bag in one hand, undoubtedly his father's late dinner. Leo's eyes, magnified by his lenses, were wide with a mix of shyness and an almost unsettling curiosity as he took in the scene. The frantic engineers, the flashing red screens, and David Chen, red-faced and yelling into a phone. He looked utterly out of place, a dandelion in a desert of code. "Dad?" Leo's voice was a soft, tentative whisper, barely audible above the hum of the servers, a stark contrast to David's furious exclamations. He took a hesitant step inside, drawn by the mesmerizing glow of the screens. He wasn't afraid, merely intrigued. His eyes, naturally drawn to patterns and systems, subconsciously began to process the torrent of information cascading across the monitors, not understanding the data, but recognizing the chaotic, broken logic. David, startled by the intrusion, whipped around, his eyes blazing with fury. "Who the hell is that? Officer Green? Get that child out of here, now!" His voice was a guttural snarl, fueled by stress and the complete breakdown of his controlled environment. The last thing he needed was a distraction, especially a child, interfering with a crisis of this magnitude. This wasn't a playground. This was a war zone of data. Leo flinched, instinctively recoiling from the sudden aggression, but his gaze remained fixed on the largest monitor, where lines of frantic error messages scrolled relentlessly. He didn't fully comprehend the text, but the chaotic rhythm, the repeated patterns of failure, captured his attention. He was a child who saw the world in systems, in interconnected parts, and this system was clearly, fundamentally, broken. His small mind, unburdened by years of conventional training or the pressure of corporate expectations, began to look for the anomaly, the piece that didn't fit. At that moment, the door hissed open again, and Brenda Jenkins swept into the hub, her face a mask of calculated concern, but her eyes gleaming with something akin to satisfaction. She was not just a board member. She was David's most vocal critic, a traditionalist who resented his innovative, often unorthodox methods and his meteoric rise. She saw David's visionary approach as reckless, his intuition as unscientific. This was her moment. She quickly assessed the scene. David panicking, Maria exhausted, the system utterly broken, and a child, a janitor's kid, standing amidst the chaos. The perfect visual to present to the rest of the board. "David!" Brenda's voice was sharp, cutting, though outwardly empathetic. "What is going on here? The preliminary reports are catastrophic. And who is this child? This is a highly sensitive environment. This reflects incredibly poorly on your leadership, David. I warned the board about relying too heavily on unproven experimental systems. This nexus. It's a house of cards, isn't it? Perhaps it's time for a more stable hand at the helm." Her words were a carefully placed dagger, aiming directly at David's already fracturing confidence. She subtly implied that his experimentation had led to this collapse, and that she, with her conservative, reliable approach, was the solution. David turned on her, his face contorted in a silent scream of frustration. But before he could respond, a low, steady voice cut through the hub. "Leo, son, what are you doing in here?" It was Old Man Peterson, who had just finished his rounds on the floor above and had followed the frantic energy radiating from the operations hub. He stood in the doorway, his broom leaning against the frame, his eyes moving from the furious David to the condemning Brenda, to his small son, who was still mesmerized by the flashing screens. He looked tired, but his gaze was firm. "Come on, boy. Time to go." Leo finally looked away from the monitor, turning to his father, his small face earnest. "Dad, the lines. They're going backwards. It's like the water is trying to flow up the waterfall, but the pump is broken, not the pipe." He gestured vaguely at the screen, a child's simple analogy for a complex problem. David scoffed, turning away in disgust. "Get him out of here, Peterson. We don't need childish analogies right now. We need solutions." Maria, however, paused. She looked at Leo, then back at the screen, her brow furrowed in thought. "The water is flowing up the waterfall," she murmured, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. The analogy, while simplistic, was strangely evocative of the illogical data flow they were seeing. But before she could dwell on it, the worst happened. The point of no return. With a final, sickening shudder, the central global map on the main screen went entirely black. The relentless scrolling error messages froze, then vanished. All data feeds stopped. The frantic hum of the servers dimmed, replaced by an ominous low drone, a sound that spoke of inert machinery, of a digital silence more terrifying than any alarm. The Nexus system, the very backbone of Synapse Tech, the foundation of Project Chimera, had utterly and irrevocably crashed. All data was offline, inaccessible, its integrity unknown. The entire company, the entire global network it supported, was paralyzed. Maria, her face ashen, turned to David. "It's gone, David. Completely offline. We're running on nothing. All primary backups are showing corruption. We're effectively blind. This isn't a glitch. It's a total systemic collapse. Her voice was devoid of hope. It will take weeks, possibly months, to rebuild from the ground up, assuming the data isn't permanently lost. We have no other options. It's over. David Chen stared at the black screen, his face draining of all color. The room spun. The panic that had been simmering now exploded into a full-blown inferno. He felt a chilling sense of absolute, utter helplessness. Everything he had built, everything he had fought for, was gone. The grand unveiling of Project Chimera on Monday was not just canceled. It was a cruel, impossible joke. Synapse Tech, the Titan, was a corpse. His meticulous plan, his carefully constructed life, had just been reduced to ashes. His world had collapsed around him, and he, the brilliant CEO, the master of algorithms, had no idea how to even begin to pick up the pieces. The black expanse of the main screen, mirroring the sudden void in David Chen's chest, hung like a digital tombstone over the operations hub. The oppressive silence that followed Maria's chilling declaration, "It's over," was broken only by the frantic, shallow breaths of the exhausted engineers. David, his face a mask of ash, stumbled back, blindly collapsing into a nearby chair. The vision of Project Chimera, the culmination of his life's ambition, dissolving into inert code, was a pain more acute than any physical wound. His meticulously constructed world had imploded. Amidst this tableau of professional despair, Leo remained an anomaly, a tiny island of unexpected calm. He hadn't flinched when David roared. He hadn't cowered when Brenda's voice turned venomous. Instead, his gaze remained fixated on the now dark main monitor, then shifted to the smaller, still flickering screens of the individual engineer workstations. His young mind, unburdened by the complex protocols and hierarchical thinking that paralyzed the adults, didn't see lines of impenetrable code or catastrophic system failures. He saw a puzzle, a very big, very broken puzzle. He took a hesitant step forward, his small hands still clutching the brown paper bag containing his father's dinner. His brow, furrowed in concentration, mirrored the engineer's, but with an innocent curiosity rather than crushing despair. He didn't understand the words or the numbers, but he intuitively grasped the chaos. He saw the patterns that weren't supposed to be there, the breaks in the flow, the parts that didn't connect. It was like a complex toy train set where one crucial track was misaligned, causing the whole system to jam. "The lines are going backwards," Leo repeated, a soft murmur, almost to himself, as he peered over the shoulder of a slumped engineer named Ken. Ken, a brilliant but high-strung programmer, merely grunted, running a hand through his already wild hair. And the green ones are fighting the red ones." He pointed a small finger, oblivious to the professional boundaries, at a small diagnostic window on Ken's screen that still showed remnants of the conflict between data packets. "It's not supposed to do that, is it?" David, startled by the child's continued presence and his incomprehensible babbling, snapped back to a semblance of furious awareness. "Peterson, get your son out of here, now! This is not a game. This is a crisis, a disaster. He's a distraction we absolutely don't need." His voice was raw, frayed by the terror of impending ruin. The last thing he could tolerate was a child's naive observations in the face of such profound failure. The image of his company's collapse, splashed across the morning's financial news, filled his mind. But Leo, either too young to fully grasp the severity of David's anger or too engrossed in the digital patterns, didn't move. He simply tilted his head, his thick glasses sliding slightly down his nose, and looked up at Ken. "The little loop, it's eating itself, like a snake eating its tail." His small finger traced an invisible circle in the air. "That's why the water can't go through." Ken, on the verge of tears from exhaustion and frustration, barely registered the words. He simply pushed his chair back violently, the screech echoing in the sudden silence, and buried his face in his hands. "It's hopeless," he mumbled, his voice muffled. "It's a complete system lock. We can't even get diagnostic reports from the core." It was Maria Lopez who first truly paused. She had been staring at the blank main screen, her mind racing, searching for a solution that didn't exist. Leo's childish analogy, the water flowing up the waterfall, had briefly snagged her attention earlier. Now, The little loop, eating itself, resonated with a faint, almost subconscious echo. She had been focusing on external attacks, on hardware failures, on corrupted data. But what if it was a self-inflicted wound, a recursive loop of logic that had somehow gone rogue? It was a possibility so elegantly simple, so counterintuitive to the complex solutions they were pursuing, that it had been overlooked. She turned slowly, her tired eyes fixing on Leo. "What did you say, kid?" she asked, her voice softer than David's, tinged with a flicker of professional curiosity. "A loop eating itself?" Leo, emboldened by her attention, pointed excitedly at a flickering cursor on Ken's monitor. "See? The way the numbers are changing? It goes in, then it comes out different, then it goes back in, and it gets bigger. And then it stops. Like it's getting stuck in a tiny room and can't get out." He was describing, in his own innocent terms, a runaway process, a memory leak, a recursive error that was consuming system resources until it crashed the entire network. He wasn't using technical jargon, but his intuitive description was startlingly accurate. "That's just a diagnostic log, kid," Maria said, dismissing it out loud, but her mind was already replaying Leo's words. A tiny room, can't get out. A recursive loop in a confined memory space. It was a classic, albeit rare, flaw in complex systems. Had they been so focused on external threats that they missed an internal logical flaw? A design oversight, magnified by the sheer scale of the nexus? Just as Maria felt a spark of something resembling hope, a heavy hand landed on Leo's shoulder. Old Man Peterson, his face etched with concern, had finally entered the hub. He had heard David's furious shouts and the rising tension. He quickly moved towards his son, his eyes apologetic towards David. "Leo, son, I told you to wait outside," Old Man Peterson said gently, his voice weary but firm, trying to pull the boy away from the mesmerizing screens. He glanced nervously at David, then at Brenda Jenkins, who was now standing with her arms crossed, a smug, contemptuous smirk playing on her lips. She had been observing the entire interaction, ready to use this unprofessional chaos as further ammunition against David. "Dad, no! Look!" Leo pulled against his father's hand, his small finger still pointing at the screen. "It's the path, Dad. It's backwards. The data is trying to go left, but the gate is on the right. It's like putting your shoes on the wrong feet." Old Man Peterson sighed, embarrassed, and tried to tug Leo more firmly. "Son, these kind people are busy. They have very important work." He knew his son had a strange fascination with how things worked, but this was neither the time nor the place for childish observations. Brenda, seizing the moment, stepped forward, her voice cutting like ice. "Indeed, Mr. Peterson, this is hardly a place for your family matters. David, with all due respect, this is an absolute circus. Your control has clearly completely eroded. Allowing a child to roam freely in a top-secret operational center during a catastrophic system failure is beyond unprofessional. It's negligent. The board will be hearing about this." Her gaze swept over David, then Maria, a triumphant glint in her eyes. The implication was clear. David was losing his mind, and his authority. David, his face still pale, his body rigid with despair, flinched at Brenda's condemnation. He knew she was right, on a superficial level. This was chaos. But then, Leo's words, "The data is trying to go left, but the gate is on the right," echoed in his mind. He had been so consumed by the magnitude of the problem, he hadn't thought about the simplicity of a potential logic error. It sounded ludicrous, but Maria's earlier hesitation, her brief flicker of interest, hinted at something. Suddenly, Maria straightened up. Her eyes, which had been fixed on Leo, snapped to her own console. "The gate on the right," she murmured, almost to herself. She began typing furiously, her fingers flying across the keyboard with renewed purpose. A routing error in the primary authentication sequence, a mirrored loop from the last patch. The initial diagnostic reports were backward compatible, but the failsafe created a recursive dependency loop. My God. She looked at David, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning comprehension. "David, Leo might be right. It's not an external attack, not a hardware failure. It's a self-consuming routing error. a logic flaw introduced in the last major update, triggered by the high traffic. We've been looking for a crack in the wall, but the problem is the foundation itself. And the child, he saw it. He articulated it with a child's simple logic. The words hung in the air, a shocking revelation. The silence was now absolute, broken only by the rapid clicks of Maria's keyboard. David stared at Maria, then at Leo, then back at Maria, his mind struggling to reconcile the overwhelming complexity of their problem with the simple, intuitive explanation offered by a child, a janitor's child. It defied every ounce of his ingrained belief in elite expertise, in the highly specialized knowledge that he believed was the only key to such intricate systems. This was the quiet observer moment reaching its crescendo. The brilliance of Leo, unseen, unheard, unacknowledged until this critical juncture, had pierced through the intellectual fog of the experts. His unfiltered observation, his innocent analogy, had illuminated a truth that years of rigorous training and complex analysis had obscured. The challenge was not just to fix the system, but for David Chen, the proud, often arrogant CEO, to humble himself, to trust the unexpected, and to recognize that genius could manifest in the most unlikely of forms. The fate of Synapse Tech, and his own legacy, now depended on whether he could shed his own prejudices and listen to the whisper of truth from a child. The hum of the servers, once a symphony of efficiency, was now a dead, ominous silence. David Chen felt the weight of it, heavy and suffocating. Brenda Jenkins's smug smirk was a dagger, twisting in the wound of his despair. But Maria's voice, sharp with a sudden electrifying insight, pierced through the haze of his defeat. He might be right. A self-consuming routing error, a logic flaw. David stared at her, then back at Leo, who still stood by Ken's dark screen, seemingly oblivious to the seismic shift his innocent words had caused. The child's explanation, "The data is trying to go left, but the gate is on the right," echoed in David's mind. A stark, almost absurd contrast to the complex, multi-layered problems his highly paid engineers had been battling for hours. His entire career had been built on the principle of expertise, of specialized knowledge. How could a child, a janitor's son, articulate a solution that eluded the brightest minds at Synapse Tech? It was an affront to his intellect, to his carefully constructed belief system. "Maria, this is absurd," David finally managed, his voice hoarse, though a flicker of desperate hope, quickly suppressed, began to ignite within him. "We're talking about the Nexus system, billions of lines of code, global infrastructure. A child's analogy about shoes on the wrong feet? You're grasping at straws." He turned to Brenda, who was now watching with a mixture of disbelief and growing alarm. Her smugness had been replaced by a nascent fear that David might actually find a solution. "Brenda, you see this, don't you? This is precisely the kind of irrational thinking I'm being subjected to." Brenda, sensing an opportunity, seized it. "Indeed, David. This is highly unconventional. We have top engineers, costing us a fortune, and you're considering a child's theory. It speaks volumes about the current leadership. The board will be utterly dismayed by this lapse in judgment. The market is already reacting. Our stock is plummeting. We need concrete action, not childish fantasies." Her words were laced with thinly veiled threats, designed to push David further into despair, to make him retreat from this audacious, desperate gamble. She pulled out her phone, making a show of checking the plunging stock figures, emphasizing the ticking clock. "Every minute you waste on this absurdity, costs us millions." The pressure intensified. The air in the hub crackled not just with despair, but with the very real threat of financial ruin and a public relations nightmare. News alerts, now flashing on one of the still active auxiliary screens, reported major outages affecting Synapse Tech's clients. The words "systemic failure" and "unprecedented crash" began to appear. David felt the walls closing in. He looked at Maria, then at the defeated faces of his engineers, then back at the dark main screen, a yawning chasm of lost data and opportunity. This was the gauntlet, the ultimate test of David's leadership, stripped bare of all pretenses. He could stick to his principles, dismiss Leo, and face inevitable ruin, confirming Brenda's accusations of being out of touch. Or he could swallow his pride, embrace the unexpected, and take a leap of faith into the unknown, knowing that failure would only amplify Brenda's accusations. It was a choice between ego and survival, between conventional wisdom and a desperate, illogical hope. Maria, however, had already made her choice. She ignored David's protests and Brenda's barbs. Her mind, suddenly clear, raced through the complex architecture of the Nexus. "David, listen to me," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "His analogy, it's precisely what we've been overlooking. The last major patch, the one designed for cross-platform compatibility, might have introduced a recursive routing anomaly if specific. High-volume data streams hit a particular authentication portal. The system is trying to send data through a pathway that's been subtly inverted by a compatibility patch. It's a closed loop, consuming its own resources until it collapses." She walked over to Leo, who had finally allowed his father to gently pull him a few feet away, but was still gazing intently at the screens. Maria knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level. "Leo," she asked gently, her voice full of a sudden, profound respect, How did you see that?" Leo, slightly shy but eager to explain, pointed to a small, almost imperceptible detail on Ken's now frozen error log. "The numbers, miss. They go 1, 2, 3, then 3, 2, 1, then 1, 2, 3 again, but then they get stuck on 3. Like a game that keeps repeating the same level because it can't find the next one." He was describing a stack overflow, a memory leak, a recursive function gone rogue. His brain, unencumbered by formal training, saw the raw, broken logic. David watched, transfixed. The fear of failure, the humiliation of Brenda's accusations, warred with a primal instinct to survive. To fix this. Maria, his most trusted technical mind, believed this child. And Leo's simple explanation, though cloaked in analogy, carried an unsettling ring of truth. David's eyes flickered from Leo's earnest face to Maria's determined expression. The arrogance that had been his shield began to crack. He had always prided himself on seeing patterns, on identifying hidden solutions. And here was one, staring him in the face, wrapped in an unexpected package. He took a deep breath, the decision a painful wrench against his pride, but a necessary one. "Maria," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "what do we do?" A collective gasp went through the room, not of despair, but of stunned surprise. David Chen, the impenetrable CEO, was asking for guidance from his head of engineering, yes, but implicitly from the child. Brenda Jenkins, across the room, looked like she had been slapped. Her face, which had been contorted in a triumphant sneer, now crumpled in disbelieving horror. Her plan was backfiring spectacularly. Maria didn't hesitate. "We need to access the core authentication module directly, bypass the standard routing protocols, and force a manual reinitialization of that specific data pathway. It's risky, it could corrupt more data, but it's the only way to break the loop without a complete system wipe." She looked at Leo. "And Leo, you pointed out the exact sequence. We need to identify that specific routing flag within the module." "I can show you where it's stuck," Leo offered, his eyes bright with excitement, oblivious to the immense pressure or the billions at stake. "It's like the little secret door that's always closed." David looked at Old Man Peterson, who stood beside his son, his face a mix of bewilderment and immense pride. Peterson simply nodded, a silent endorsement of his son's inexplicable brilliance. "All right," David said, his voice gaining strength, his mind now fully committed, the adrenaline of decision replacing the paralysis of fear. "Maria, you direct. Ken, get ready to execute the override protocols. And Leo," he knelt down, bringing himself closer to the child's level, his eyes for the first time reflecting genuine humility and a glimmer of awe, "you show us the way. No one, absolutely no one, touches a thing without your instruction for this specific task. Old Man Peterson, stay with your son. Ensure his safety." This was the ultimate pivot, the moment the CEO, once blind with pride, chose to trust the intuition of a janitor's child over the conventional wisdom that had failed him. It was a perilous, almost ludicrous gamble, but it was the only path forward. The fate of Synapse Tech, the legacy of David Chen, and the future of Project Chimera now rested precariously on the unassuming brilliance of an unlikely codebreaker. The digital collapse had given birth to an even more profound human collapse, that of David's own rigid prejudices. And from that collapse, a new, fragile hope began to emerge. The operations hub, usually a cacophony of hushed commands and the rhythmic click of keyboards, fell into an almost reverent silence. All eyes were on Leo, the small boy who had unwittingly become the improbable beacon of hope. David Chen, CEO, knelt beside him, his face a complex mixture of professional desperation and dawning, almost fearful awe. Maria Lopez, the brilliant head of engineering, stood poised, her fingers hovering over her keyboard, ready to execute Leo's intuitive insights. Even Old Man Peterson, Leo's father, stood close by, a quiet guardian, his weathered face etched with a mix of pride, bewilderment, and an almost sacred trust. Brenda Jenkins, however, remained rooted to her spot across the room, a frozen tableau of disbelief and burgeoning panic. Her carefully constructed image of David's incompetence was crumbling, replaced by a terrifying vision of her own imminent professional demise. She watched with a morbid fascination, unable to tear her eyes away from the unfolding miracle. "It's like a train set, Miss Maria," Leo began, his voice clear and earnest, utterly oblivious to the billions of dollars hanging in the balance, to the career of the CEO, or to the very global infrastructure he was about to mend. His small hand reached out, not quite touching Maria's screen, but hovering over it, pointing. "See? The little yellow train needs to go to the blue station. But someone put a piece of track from the red station right here." He gestured to a specific, almost imperceptible segment of the diagnostic log that Maria had pulled up on her console, a segment that, to the trained eye, contained a complex series of routing flags and authentication tokens. "It makes the yellow train think it's supposed to go to the red station, and then it gets stuck because the red station gate is locked for yellow trains." Maria's eyes widened. A rogue routing flag, mirrored from the last compatibility patch for the legacy systems. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, already translating Leo's analogy into commands. The yellow train data streams are being rerouted through a red station authentication portal, creating a recursive loop because they don't have the correct security keys for that specific portal. The system keeps trying, failing, and looping back, consuming all resources until it collapses. It was elegant in its simplicity, a flaw hidden in plain sight, overlooked by brilliant minds fixated on external threats or more complex internal corruptions. David watched, mesmerized. Leo wasn't just guessing. He was intuitively grasping the fundamental logic of the error, a logic that had eluded his entire team. "The little secret door that's always closed," Leo had called it. "Okay, Leo," David said, his voice unusually soft, devoid of all earlier arrogance. "Show us. Show Maria exactly where the red station track is." He handed Maria his own tablet, its screen mirroring her console, so Leo could point directly without touching the critical equipment. Leo, emboldened by the CEO's direct appeal, took the tablet. His small finger, surprisingly steady, tapped on a specific line of code, then traced a pathway on a network diagram. "Right here," he whispered, pointing to an obscure, seemingly innocuous function called deep within the authentication module. "And this is where it keeps getting stuck." He then moved his finger to another section. "You have to change this part." He indicated a string of hexadecimal values. "So the yellow train knows to go straight to the blue station, even if it sees the red track." Maria's breath hitched. A specific value in the security token itself, causing a forced misdirection. It's genius. Pure, unadulterated genius. She looked at David, her eyes gleaming with a mix of awe and renewed hope. "He's identified the exact variable that's triggering the recursive loop, David. If we can force a manual override of this specific authentication flag, we can break the cycle." "Ken, ready the override protocols," David commanded, his voice now ringing with authority, but an authority tempered by profound humility. "Maria, you have control. Execute the bypass. And Leo, stay right here. Guide us." The hub became a theater of high stakes, rapid-fire action. Maria's fingers danced across the keyboard, entering the complex sequence of commands. Ken, the high-strung engineer, was poised, his hand hovering over the execute button for the override. David stood directly behind Maria, his gaze fixed on the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. Old man Peterson stood silently beside Leo, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder, a silent guardian of this unfolding miracle. Brenda Jenkins, meanwhile, had begun to hyperventilate. She saw the focused intensity, the renewed hope on the engineers' faces. She saw David, no longer panicked, but leading, commanding, empowered by the very child she had dismissed. Her public humiliation, her certain professional ruin, loomed large. She felt the cold sweat trickle down her back. Maria's fingers paused, hovering over the final command. She looked at Leo one last time. "Are you absolutely sure, Leo? This is the one?" Leo, his eyes wide with innocent certainty, nodded emphatically. "It's the wrong shoe for the yellow train, Miss Maria. It has to go on the blue one." "Execute!" David barked, the word filled with a desperate, all-consuming hope. Maria's finger descended, a final resounding click. The breath-holding moment stretched into an eternity. The screens in the operations hub, which had been a chaotic mess of scrolling errors, or a terrifying black void, remained stubbornly, agonizingly still. The low hum of the inert servers persisted. Silence, thick and heavy, descended once more. The triumphant light that had begun to glow on Maria's face flickered, replaced by a ghost of doubt. David's shoulders slumped, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. Had they risked everything, only for a child's analogy to lead them further into the abyss? Brenda's mouth twitched, a triumphant, cruel smirk starting to form. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a single green line flickered on the global map. Then another, and another, like tiny sparks igniting a dormant circuit. Suddenly, the hum of the servers intensified, a deep, resonant thrum of awakening power. Data began to flow. Green lines shot across the global map, reconnecting the digital arteries of Synapse Tech. The frozen error logs on Ken's screen dissolved, replaced by a rapid, triumphant stream of System OK notifications. The main screen, once a terrifying black, exploded into a vibrant, living tapestry of green connections, pulsating with life, shimmering with restored data. The Nexus system, against all odds, was back online, fully operational. A collective, stunned silence hung in the air for a full, heart-stopping second. Then, a roar erupted. Not a roar of anger, but of pure, unadulterated relief and exultation. Engineers leaped from their chairs, shouting, cheering, slapping each other on the back. Maria, tears streaming down her face, let out a choked sob of pure exhaustion and triumph. She turned to David, her face beaming. "It worked, David. It worked. He did it." David Chen stood motionless, staring at the resurrected global map. His meticulously constructed world, which had collapsed mere minutes ago, had been rebuilt, not by his own genius, but by the unexpected pure logic of a child. He turned, slowly, to Leo, who was now looking up at him, a shy, proud smile on his face, clutching his father's brown paper bag. David knelt down again, this time not in despair, but in profound, humbling awe. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were now soft, glistening with unshed tears. "Leo," David whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You saved us. You saved everything." He extended a hand, gently ruffling the boy's unruly hair. Brenda Jenkins, across the room, watched the scene unfold. The joyful shouts of the engineers, David Chen's humbling praise for the child, the undeniable evidence on the glowing screens. It was all too much. Her face, a mask of fury and humiliation, crumpled. She hadn't just lost the battle. She had been utterly, spectacularly defeated by a force she had never even considered. Her carefully orchestrated plan to expose David had backfired with devastating precision. Her reign of cynicism and prejudice was over, unmasked by the very innocence she had dismissed. She sank back into her chair, a figure of pathetic, utter defeat, her world having just imploded, not with a bang, but with the quiet, undeniable logic of a janitor's kid. The operations hub, moments ago a chamber of digital death, now vibrated with the electrifying hum of a resurrected system and the joyous, triumphant shouts of the engineering team. Brenda Jenkins, a figure of utter abject defeat, finally stirred from her catatonic state. Her face, still ashen and contorted, hardened into a mask of bitter resentment. She had witnessed her meticulously crafted plans, her carefully nurtured network of influence, and her very professional identity crumble into dust, not at the hands of a rival CEO, but at the astonishing, undeniable brilliance of a child she had dismissed as irrelevant. With a stiff, almost robotic movement, she pushed herself up from her chair. There were no tears, no dramatic outbursts left in her, only a cold, dead certainty of her professional ruin. She cast a final venomous glance at David Chen, who was still kneeling beside Leo, a genuine, heartfelt smile illuminating his face. Brenda opened her mouth, perhaps to utter one last cutting remark, but no words came. The sheer weight of her public humiliation, amplified by the triumphant cheers now echoing around her, silenced her completely. Without a word, without a backward glance, she turned and walked out of the operations hub, her once commanding presence reduced to a shadow of its former self. Her departure was swift, silent, and absolute, leaving behind only the lingering, faintly acrid scent of defeat. David Chen watched her go, a flicker of grim satisfaction crossing his features, but it was quickly replaced by a profound sense of introspection. The crisis had peeled back layers of his own arrogance, revealing the raw, vulnerable core of his insecurities. He stood up slowly, his eyes still fixed on Leo, who now looked up at him with wide, curious eyes. The boy seemed completely unaware of the magnitude of what he had just accomplished, or the personal transformation he had triggered in the powerful CEO. David cleared his throat, his voice still a little hoarse, but now imbued with a newfound, genuine humility. He addressed the assembled engineers, their faces still flushed with adrenaline and triumph. "Everyone," he began, his voice cutting through the celebratory din, instantly commanding their attention. "What you have witnessed tonight is nothing short of a miracle, and it was achieved not by our collective expertise alone, but by a level of intuitive genius that transcended all our preconceived notions of what's possible." His gaze swept across their faces, lingering on Maria's. We were looking for a complex external threat. Leo, with his pure, unburdened logic, saw the simple, internal truth. He then turned fully towards Leo and to Old Man Peterson, who stood proudly beside his son, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. David walked towards them, and in a gesture that would forever be etched in the memory of every person in that room, he extended his hand not to Leo directly, but to Old Man Peterson, his gaze earnest, filled with respect. "Mr. Peterson," David said, his voice quiet, sincere. "Your son, he saved Synapse Tech. He saved my legacy. He saved everything." Old Man Peterson, usually a man of few words, grasped David's hand, a firm, calloused grip. "Leo's always been a thinker, sir," he mumbled, his voice thick with emotion, a profound sense of pride swelling in his chest. "Always taking things apart, putting them back together, seeing how they work." He gently nudged Leo forward. David knelt once more, this time addressing Leo directly, his eyes sparkling with a genuine, almost paternal admiration. "Leo," he said, "what you did tonight, it was extraordinary. You have a gift, a truly unique way of seeing things. We, with all our degrees and experience, were blind. You showed us the light." He paused. A new idea, audacious and profoundly meaningful, forming in his mind. "Synapse Tech owes you a debt we can never fully repay. But I want to try. I want to offer you a special role here, Leo. Not as an employee, not yet, but as our chief innovation scout. I want you to continue seeing things your way, without the confines of conventional thinking. And I want to personally ensure that you receive the best education possible in any field you choose, anywhere in the world, fully funded by Synapse Tech. Your brilliance deserves every opportunity to flourish." Leo's eyes widened behind his thick glasses, taking in David's words with an innocent wonder. He didn't fully grasp the immense financial implications, but he understood the promise of endless puzzles to solve, of being allowed to explore how things work, without limits. I can still play with the lines?" he asked, a hopeful glimmer in his eyes. David chuckled, a genuine, unburdened laugh that echoed pleasantly through the hub. "You can play with all the lines, Leo, and we'll learn from you." He then looked up at Old Man Peterson, his expression softening further. "And Mr. Peterson, please, consider your son's education and future our privilege. You've raised an exceptional young man, and your quiet dedication to this company, your unwavering presence, has not gone unnoticed. I would be honored if you would consider staying with us, in a more advisory role, perhaps helping us to cultivate this culture of open-mindedness and humility that Leo has so profoundly reminded us of tonight." Old Man Peterson's eyes welled up. He swallowed hard, tears silently tracing paths down his weathered cheeks. This was more than he had ever dared to dream for his son. His quiet sacrifice, his years of unseen labor, were finally being recognized, and more importantly, validated through the incredible potential of his beloved Leo. The new calm that settled over Synapse Tech in the following days was profound. It wasn't just the absence of the system crash, but a fundamental shift in the company's very DNA. David Chen, deeply changed by the experience, implemented a radical overhaul of the corporate culture. The rigid hierarchies began to soften. Innovation challenges were open to every employee, regardless of their department or role. Outside-the-box thinking, once a buzzword, became a core principle. David himself adopted a more approachable, humble leadership style. He made it a point to regularly visit different departments, engaging with employees at all levels, genuinely listening to their perspectives. He understood now that true genius was not confined to corner offices or advanced degrees, but could reside in the most unexpected places. This pivotal event, this meaningful new opportunity, transformed Synapse Tech from a mere tech giant into a beacon of enlightened corporate philosophy. David's profound realization that knowledge and intuition could bloom from the most unexpected sources led to a paradigm shift in how they hired, trained, and fostered talent. He began to champion diversity, not just as a buzzword, but as a crucial strategic imperative, recognizing that varied perspectives, unburdened by conventional wisdom, were essential for true innovation. David and Maria often found themselves reflecting on that fateful night. "I was so caught up in the complexity, David," Maria confessed one afternoon, watching Leo, now a frequent visitor to the hub, quietly observing a new software simulation. "My training, my experience, it all narrowed my focus. I couldn't see the forest for the trees." David nodded, his gaze following Leo. "And I was too arrogant to even look at the trees, Maria. Too convinced that the solution had to come from someone who looked and thought exactly like me. Leo taught me that true intelligence isn't about credentials, it's about connection. Seeing the pattern, understanding the flow, regardless of how you articulate it." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. "He taught me humility, and that's a lesson worth far more than any system repair bill." The luminous spirit, the idea that worth isn't dictated by appearance or status, had found a new, profound embodiment in Synapse Tech. The CEO who panicked when his system crashed had not only recovered but had been transformed. His pride replaced by gratitude, his fear by a renewed sense of purpose. And all because of the quiet, unseen genius of a janitor's kid. 5 years later, the name Synapse Tech no longer just conjured images of cutting-edge software and robust data solutions. It symbolized a revolutionary approach to corporate culture, a testament to the power of humility and the brilliance that could be found in unexpected places. The glass tower in Hanoi, once a monument to David Chen's singular ambition, now buzzed with a vibrant, inclusive energy. Its walls, once silent and imposing, now echoed with the lively chatter of diverse teams, the excited murmurs of young interns, and the occasional delighted laugh of a brilliant young mind solving an intricate puzzle. David Chen, now in his early 40s, carried himself with a quiet authority, a stark contrast to the tightly wound intensity of his past. The subtle lines around his eyes spoke not of stress, but of deep thought and genuine empathy. He was no longer just a CEO, he was a respected visionary, a leader renowned not just for his technological prowess, but for his profound human insights. The humbling experience of the Nexus crash had permanently altered his perception of intelligence and worth. His meticulously tailored suits now seemed to fit more comfortably, less like an armor and more like a second skin, reflecting an inner peace he'd finally found. Under David's leadership, Synapse Tech had not only fully recovered from the catastrophic crash, but had soared to unprecedented heights. The Nexus system, fortified by Leo's intuitive insights, was more stable, more resilient, and more innovative than ever before. Project Chimera, the AI platform that had nearly died at birth, had been launched successfully, revolutionizing global financial markets with its ethical, human-centric predictive analytics. But the company's greatest triumph wasn't just in its renewed technological dominance. It was in the profound transformation of its internal culture. David had implemented a groundbreaking open innovation policy, encouraging every employee, regardless of their role or department, to submit ideas, challenge assumptions, and contribute to problem solving. Brainstorming sessions now routinely included engineers, marketing specialists, and administrative staff, fostering an environment where diverse perspectives were not just tolerated, but actively sought out. The old rigid hierarchies had melted away, replaced by flat structures and collaborative teams. He championed mentorship programs, personally overseeing initiatives that paired seasoned veterans with ambitious newcomers, ensuring knowledge transfer and fostering a strong sense of community. And at the heart of this cultural revolution was Leo. Now a confident, bespectacled teenager, Leo was a student at MIT, specializing in computational theory and quantum computing, all expenses fully covered by Synapse Tech. He still returned to the Hanoi headquarters during his breaks, not just as a casual visitor, but as an official lead logic consultant, a title David had personally created for him. Leo, with his signature blend of quiet observation and startlingly clear, intuitive logic, would often sit in on high-level technical meetings, offering profound, yet simply articulated insights that often cut through complex jargon and led to elegant solutions. He was a living embodiment of Synapse Tech's new philosophy, that genius could be found anywhere, in anyone, regardless of age, background, or formal credentials. His quiet presence was a constant, humbling reminder to everyone in the company, from the newest intern to the most senior executive, that true understanding often comes from looking at problems with fresh, unbiased eyes. Old Man Peterson, Leo's father, had gracefully accepted David's offer and now served as a beloved cultural ambassador for Synapse Tech. He didn't manage operations or technical teams, but he was a constant, revered presence, often seen walking through the offices, sharing quiet wisdom, and subtly reminding everyone of the profound impact of empathy and the hidden strengths of every individual. His steady, kind demeanor was a powerful counterpoint to the high-stakes world of tech, a grounding force that ensured the company never forgot its newfound humility. He was a living testament to the respect and appreciation the company now held for every person, regardless of their role. David Chen's commitment to paying it forward extended far beyond the walls of Synapse Tech. Haunted by the memory of his own narrow-mindedness and inspired by Leo's unexpected brilliance, he established the Peterson Pathways Initiative. This massive global foundation, funded generously by Synapse Tech and David's personal fortune, was dedicated to identifying, nurturing, and empowering young talents from underserved communities worldwide. It offered full scholarships to top universities, provided mentorship from leading figures in tech and science, and created innovation incubators for aspiring young minds who lacked traditional access to resources. The initiative specifically sought out individuals who, like Leo, demonstrated innate problem-solving abilities and unconventional thinking, regardless of their academic background or socioeconomic status. David often said in interviews, "We are not looking for resumes. We are looking for brilliance, wherever it may choose to hide." News articles and documentaries often featured David and Leo, their remarkable story becoming a global phenomenon. It was a powerful narrative that transcended the tech world, resonating with anyone who had ever felt underestimated or marginalized. Their story was a vibrant, compelling counter-narrative to the prevailing elitism in many industries, a constant reminder that true innovation often came from diversity of thought and perspective, not just from privileged institutions. On a bright, bustling afternoon, David stood in the atrium of the newly expanded Synapse Tech campus. Sunlight streamed through the massive glass ceiling, illuminating a vibrant, collaborative space filled with open workstations, interactive displays, and laughter. He watched Leo, now taller, his shoulders broader, passionately explaining a complex algorithm to a group of wide-eyed university interns. Old man Peterson sat nearby, sipping a cup of coffee, a gentle smile on his face as he observed his son, a profound sense of contentment radiating from him. David felt a profound sense of peace. The panic, the despair, the suffocating arrogance, all were distant echoes. He had almost lost everything, but in doing so, he had gained something infinitely more valuable: humility, wisdom, and a profound understanding of what truly mattered. Synapse Tech was no longer just a company. It was a living ecosystem, a testament to the belief that true strength lay in embracing every form of intelligence, in fostering a culture of empathy, and in recognizing the unseen genius that could emerge from the most unexpected places. The future, once a terrifying black screen, was now a boundless expanse of possibility, reimagined and illuminated by the quiet logic of a child. If this story stirred your heart and reminded you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming narratives that delve into the profound human spirit and the power of unseen heroes. Thank you for joining our journey.